Okay, time to check the review poll. What? A tie? How am I gonna settle this? Wait, what do the comments say? Well, that's one way to settle this. Let's talk about something different. Journey into Imagination. Journey into Imagination. A beloved dark ride back in the 80s where a jolly man and his purple friend take you on a journey to use your imagination. Easily one of the best rides at Epcot. But that's not the JII that I remember. No. My first experience with this ride was in its third incarnation, Journey into Imagination with Figment. I remembered when my family took me to this ride as a kid, and I remembered liking it. I didn't think much after it, but I thought it was great. I loved when Figment messed up the experiments. I loved when Dr. Channing tried to keep the tour under control. I even enjoyed the finale scene. Many years later, I got curious. I wanted to know more about that weird attraction that I rode long ago, so I did some digging on the internet and discovered that there were 2 incarnations of this ride. And after some more digging, I find the story of this attraction inspiring, devastating, and kinda unsatisfying. Let's start from the beginning. The idea of Journey into Imagination originated from a concept from Tony Baxter, who wanted to make a new land in the Magic Kingdom called Discovery Bay. He had a few attractions in mind, but one of those ideas was called Professor Marvel's Gallery of Wonders, which was an animatronic show featuring Professor Marvel and his inventions and animals, one of them being his pet dragon. Unfortunately, this concept was scrapped since Disney was busy constructing a brand new park at the time, Epcot. But Baxter didn't give up on his concept and tried to rework it for his next project. Now, during the construction of Epcot, Disney wanted the theme to be about technological and cultural progress. The future side of the park would have pavilions, each having a different theme, like energy, transportation, etc. When Baxter was tasked to design the land pavilion, he came up with the design featuring 7 towering crystals, which would feature a hot air balloon dark ride. This pavilion was going to be sponsored by a logging company, but Kraft soon became the sponsor, and wanted the pavilion to focus more on agriculture and food production. Oh, I should probably explain why there are sponsors. Side note, this video was not sponsored by any of those companies, so don't get the wrong idea. Okay? Good. You see, Disney was a small company, even after opening Disneyland to the public. So they would bring in different companies to fund the attractions to keep them running. This was also the case for attractions in Magic Kingdom and Epcot. But in Epcot's case, each company would get a pavilion with their own sponsorship lounge. For example, Exxon would sponsor Universe of Energy, and General Motors would sponsor World of Motion. So Tony Baxter was brought again to design another pavilion, and Kodak was to sponsor it. But they couldn't decide what the topic would be, and wished for something imaginative. This gave Baxter the idea to create a ride that teaches the importance of imagination, and he reworked his Professor Marvel concept into the Dreamfinder and Figment. The Dreamfinder is a whimsical inventor who collects dreams in his flying machine, the Dreamcatcher. He uses his imagination to create Figment, a tiny purple dragon with 2 tiny wings, big yellow eyes, steer horns, a lizard's body, a crocodile nose, and a dash of childish delight. And his 7 towering crystal idea was reworked into the design of the pavilion. There was even a theme song written for this attraction called One Little Spark, composed by the Sherman Brothers. This song would play throughout the entire ride, and would have different variations on each segment. On October 1st, 1982, Epcot opened to the public, but Journey into Imagination was still under construction. However, Figment and Dreamfinder were already introduced as promotional materials, strolling actors, played by Rob Schneider, and the activities in ImageWorks. But by the time the ride opened, they were about to be big. The ride starts with guests being introduced to the Dreamfinder, this time voiced by Chuck McCain, flying in his Dreamcatcher, collecting ideas that spark the imagination, stating that you'll never know what kind of figment you may come up with. Then he proceeds to use his imagination to create a figment of his own, a tiny purple dragon appropriately named Figment. He then proceeds to fill the Dreamcatcher with more ideas. Numbers, letters, papers for writing, costumes, makeup, stages for lighting, teardrops, laughter, electron beams and crystal prisms, gyroscopes and magnetisms, holograms and 3 dimensions. Whew, that's a lot of ideas. Now that the bag is full, they set a course to the Dreamport to store the ideas. Thankfully, the Dreamport is never far away when you use your imagination. Also, can I gush about how cool the show scene is? This attraction is an auto-moving dark ride, and this introduction lasts for 3 minutes. How do they pull this off? Here's how. They made a turntable with 5 show scenes on each side. The vehicle would lock in place, rotate to the center, and move alongside the circular path lined perfectly with the Dreamcatcher. That means they had to create 5 Dreamfinders, 5 Dreamcatchers, 5 Figments, and 5 walls so the effects wouldn't blend into each scene. The design is so unique, I just want you to look at it!
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it!
The ride heads to the Dreamport to deposit the ideas in the storage, creating realms of imagination. The art realm features Dreamfinder painting a portrait using a large paintbrush, an origami carousel, and Figment holding a pot of rainbows near a pond. Notice how the room is mostly white, most likely to represent a canvas. We move to the literature room, where the atmosphere has a dark and spooky tone. Dreamfinder plays an organ with computer buttons. Each key he presses creates words that transforms into a book, where its monsters surround a scared little Figment. There's also a feature where Figment holds 3-letter blocks, and he switches the silhouette from a bat to a cat. That's cute. I love it. The next round features performing arts, where we see Figment trying different costumes, while Dreamfinder orchestrates a laser light show. We even get Figment in a cute astronaut suit wanting to hitch a ride. Next up is the science realm, where Dreamfinder uses a machine to look at plants growing, minerals forming into crystals, and space. Dreamfinder tells us that imagination is our key to unlock the hidden wonders of our world. The final room shows Figment in the middle, singing the chorus of One Little Spark. The entire room has movie screens of Figment, using his imagination to become different things. Dreamfinder, sitting behind a movie camera, tells you to go upstairs to the ImageWorks, the creative playground of the future, where you can, well, use your imagination. To say that JII was a hit would be an understatement. This attraction was beloved by many Disney fans. Dreamfinder and Figment became popular characters, and the One Little Spark theme got so many fans singing for years to come. It teaches us the importance of imagination and how it can be used to create many ideas. Well done, Tony Baxter. You truly have a little spark of inspiration. But unfortunately, on October 10th, 1998, the ride was closed. To understand JII's closure, you have to understand how important it is for an attraction to have a sponsor. Not only do they pay the bills for the attraction, but they can also use the attraction to promote some of their products. Kodak was the sponsor for JII, however, they were struggling financially with the rise of digital media and photography. Despite this, Disney has been demanding them to keep funding the ride or to give it a refurbishment. Otherwise, they would be replaced. Kodak eventually agreed, but on one condition: they would only send Disney a fraction of the funds required. On October 1st, 1999, JII was reopened but with a new title, Journey into Your Imagination, and it became one of the worst, if not the worst Disney ride ever made. Problems are already shown by the time you set foot in the pavilion. The setting of this ride takes place inside an open house tour of a facility called the Imagination Institute, removing the setting of the original ride. Instead of the jolly Santa Claus-esque Dreamfinder, the host is Dr. Nigel Channing, the chairman of the Imagination Institute, played by Eric Idle, who tells you about the Imagination Institute's new invention, the Imagination Scanner, where he will scan you twice before and after a series of tests you'll go through. Hey, wait a minute! Why does the loading platform look different? The original layout showed the loading dock at the entrance. Wait, what does the ride's layout look like? No, they did not. They got rid of the 5-scene turntable! So, since Kodak could only lend a fraction of their funds to Disney, they shortened the layout by removing parts of the original track. That means everything from the turntable was removed. The Dreamfinders, the Dreamcatchers, and the Figments. We haven't boarded this ride yet, and we already see that the heart of Tony Baxter's creation is gone.
No!
So the ride starts with the Imagination Scanner, scanning the guests.
Well, as you can see, there's not much going on upstairs, imagination-wise.
Yep, you heard it here, folks. This ride calls you stupid for not having an imagination.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
So after being backstabbed by Nigel's comment, we enter the sound lab, and it's a dark room with train horns blasting in your ear. Wow, how imaginative. Almost as bad as this next scene where they reference a much better ride than this.
Is this looking glass actually magnifying, or is it your imagination?
Then we pass a room where a brick goes through a table with no glass and... Wait a minute! This ride is nothing but a bunch of cheap gags! There's nothing imaginative about these rooms. It's just a bunch of lackluster visuals and boring effects that have no magic of using your imagination. Okay, maybe these illusions look great for a science museum, but this is a main attraction of the Imagination Pavilion. It's supposed to inspire you to imagine. I demand to be inspired. Also, the scenery is dark and bland, making the facility feel cold, uninviting, and very generic. Disney, do you expect kids to be intrigued by this? They are gonna fall asleep riding this. Give this place some color.
No, not that one.
We head back to the Imagination Scanner and get scanned one more time, and... oh wow, look at all the stuff you made. You have a wonderful imagination. Yay!
You're quite clever. Wow.
Okay, so you give Dreamfinder the boot, but you keep Figment in, just to have him say a few lines? What insult to injury! After that terrible experience, guests can exit through the ImageWorks. Oh yeah, they built a new Imageworks in this section, and the original one upstairs was blocked off. And now it looks abandoned, almost as its magic has been drained out, leaving it in a lifeless state. While the new Imageworks was less impressive than the original one. So, was this new incarnation any good? Of course not. Are you even surprised? What was once a magical journey, teaching you to look at the world with a sense of wonder, was reduced to a boring ride with unimpressive gimmicks. It insults you for having no imagination, and leaves you unsatisfied with a finale that looks like it was hastily made. The catchy One Little Spark theme was removed, Dreamfinder is nowhere to be found, and Figment was utilized very little. If I were to give this ride a summary, I would say this feels like a ride built by society. It genuinely feels like this ride was made to ruin a man's creation. Let's pretend that this was inspired by a kid who has a wild imagination, and whenever he shared his ideas to anyone, he would get laughed by the kids, sent to detention by the teachers, and grounded by his parents. Years later, we see this man, all grown up, making a ride with a lot of love and care, and then in comes this uninspired ride with no heart and soul, telling him to stop using his imagination and just grow up. And that's what Journey into Your Imagination is. A perfect depiction on how society wants you to use imagination, to not use it at all. Needless to say, fans of the original attraction hated this ride. It was so bad that even Kodak was upset. They were disappointed that this was what they invested part of their budget for. Guests consider this to be the worst attraction at Epcot. And I have to agree with them, because it closed down 2 years after debuting. Due to the negative reception of JIYI, Disney made the decision to rework the ride back into some of its original form, and they would fund it themselves instead of Kodak. The Imagineers were given a modest makeover budget, but due to the disastrous events of the 11th of September causing park attendance to drop, the budget was shortened to $8 million. Nonetheless, the attraction opened on June 2nd, 2002, with a brand new name, Journey into Imagination with Figment, which is still up to this day. How does this one fare? Well, for one, the queue is mostly the same, just with the new coat of paint. Even the loading dock is still where the turntable used to be. Bummer. So the ride starts off with Eric Idle reprising his role as Dr. Nigel Channing, welcoming everyone to his open house tour. Here he plans to show you how the 5 human senses can help you capture your imagination. But Figment interrupts and joins the tour, much to Nigel's dismay. Guests proceed to the Sound Lab, where they play a set of tones in each of the guests' ear, but it's interrupted by a phone call from Figment, telling us that it's about listening with our imagination, not with our ears. Then he plays a train sound right after Nigel lost his train of thought. Next stop is the Sight Lab, where Nigel tells you to read the letters from the eye chart, only to have Figment scramble them at the very last second. He tells us we could see a lot of things if we used our imagination, and starts bouncing his head on lyrics. Oh yeah, forgot to mention that the One Little Spark theme is back, and it plays every time Figment sabotages an experiment. So, if Figment and One Little Spark are back, then certainly Dreamfinder! Hello? Oh. He's not back? Aww. While traveling to the Smell Lab, Dr. Channing and Figment argue on how imagination should be used, while we see an illumination of a butterfly escape in a cage, hinting us that imagination works best when it's set free. As we make our way to the smell lab, Nigel tries to tell us how smells trigger the imagination. Figment interrupts as usual and turns the smell machine into a slot machine. He then sprays the guest with a skunk scent. Gee, thanks. After that incident, Nigel decides to end the tour before entering the touch and taste labs. Figment invites the guest to go to his open house instead, where he literally turns it upside down. It's at this point when Nigel discovered that imagination shouldn't be captured, but set free, which prompts Figment telling him that he has a wonderful imagination. We enter the finale of the ride, where Figment turns the Institute into a fantasy world of imagination, where a bunch of Figments use their imagination in different ways and sing the One Little Spark theme in its original lyrics. Sadly, the Image Works is still at the gutted portion of the ride, while the original one is still left abandoned, though they did add some more unique experiences to interact with. Journey into Imagination with Figment to this day has a mixed reception. On one hand, people were glad that Journey into Your Imagination was gone for good, and the return of Figment and the One Little Spark song was a breath of fresh air. But on the other hand, it was criticized for reusing the same track layout and some effects from Your Imagination. Figment's personality changed from an innocent child to a mischievous scamp. And for some reason, the Dr. Channing moon looks creepy? What? You mean you're terrified of this thing?
Horrible!
I mean, I guess it's a little off-putting, but it's not levels of nightmare fuel. Have some courage, people. You know, even after all of the ride's problems, I still love it. I know, hear me out. Look, the current version is nothing compared to the original JII, but I can't help myself to love this ride for what it is. I love the idea of an open house tour in a facility fallen apart by a fictional creature. Figment's personality being a nuisance may not sit well with the original fans, but you have to remember that Dr. Channing was the same guy that insulted you in Your Imagination. He wants you to capture and control imagination with your 5 human senses. But Figment is basically telling you,
hey, you don't need to limit your mind. Look what happened in the last experiment. Just set it free and you got a wonderful imagination.
The way he sabotages the experiments feels intentional, as if he's taking jabs at JIYI, though the skunk spray and the upside down house probably weren't the best features on the ride. And you can't deny that the One Little Spark song still sounds good even to this day. Adding new lyrics to the first 4 choruses and have it come in full circle and play the original lyrics in its glorious finale. Very poetic. And I'm not the only one that loves this ride. I've seen comments from other users supporting this ride as well. And if you're one of those fans watching this, hi there. Welcome to the Figment Club. Whether you love or hate this ride, it's all up to you. But as I stand, I'm like a parent watching their kid fail miserably in a talent show and coming up to them and say, "You did good. I'm proud of you." I will defend this ride with my life because it's my favorite version of Journey into Imagination. And if it ever closes down and gets replaced, I will be devastated to see my little Figment go. Even though this attraction has been around for over 2 decades with an uncertain future, I wish it could stay for much longer. Well, If it ever gets rethemed, at least bring back the Dreamfinder so Figment can reunite with him. That's all I can ever ask. Well, that about does it for this video. I wish I could have ended this with a bang, but my creative motivation has been drained after looking at its sad history. Maybe next time I'll make up for it. Hold on, what is that? Dean Finder? As in Dream Finder? What's this doing here? I just had a spark of inspiration. Alright, this might sound weird, but I'm going to make up a timeline for Journey into Imagination. Give it a little cinematic universe, if you will. Keep in mind, none of this is official. It's all headcanon. Got it? Good. Let's start the story. This is the Dreamfinder, a lovable creative genius who collects ideas that spark the imagination. He uses some of those ideas to create Figment, a tiny purple dragon with a childlike personality. Together, they would collect ideas and store them in the Dreamport to make realms of imagination, with the goal being to encourage everyone to use their imagination. Sounds like a great way to inspire lots of people. You know, if all of this wasn't a daydream. So yeah, all of this was imagined by a man named Dean Finder, a scientist who hates his job at the Imagination Institute. He would daydream a lot and live in these fantasy worlds in his head, but Dr. Channing would tell him to snap out of it. Dr. Channing would also reject a lot of Dean's ideas for inventions, stating that they were too imaginative. You see, Nigel was not a creative genius, and he believed he could teach everyone about imagination by breaking it down into logic and reasoning. Once he became the chairman of the Institute, his first priority of business was to capture and control imagination. His solution was to create a machine that would scan everyone's imagination and host an open house tour to experiment his scanner with the guests. I should also mention that Dean also imagines characters in his head and draws sketches of them, including the lovable Figment. However, his motivations were shut down when Dr. Channing caught a glimpse at his sketches and said, "What is this? If I saw someone create that, I'd tell them they have a horrible imagination. Stop letting your mind run wild and get back to work!" Needless to say, nobody was encouraged to be inspired, all being captured and controlled by a snooty chairman, both figuratively and literally. On October 1st, 1999, the Imagination Institute opened its house tour to the public, and guests entered to be scanned by the Imagination Scanner, only to have them insulted by the chairman. The rest of the tour proceeds just like the ride, an uninspiring tour with lackluster experiments. They were scanned one last time and, oh wow, they have wonderful imaginations. Look at all the things they thought of. Understandably, the guests were not pleased. They did not learn anything about imagination, and they were all rude to Nigel. Dean was watching the disaster behind the scenes, and even he didn't like what he saw. He went back to his office and said, "How could my boss insult the guests like that? This isn't what imagination should be about." Before he could feel any more devastated, he sees a familiar-looking purple creature flying by. He stops the creature from leaving the Institute and asks who he is and where he came from. The creature says in a sorry voice,
My name is Figment. I was created by Dr. Channing with the goal to capture and control imagination. But the open house tour was such a failure, he blamed it all on me. He told me,
"You are the worst Figment anyone could ever imagine. Leave this institute immediately."
Now I have no purpose. I'm a figment with no imagination.
Dean was confused at first. He couldn't possibly believe that Nigel would create one of his own ideas. Unless... maybe he was disciplined, so his idea could be stolen. Dean reassures Figment that he's the original creator, and would gladly teach Figment the importance of imagination. He starts by singing him a melody that he came up with in his spare time called One Little Spark, and after a long overnight lesson, Dean had created the figment of his dreams. The next day, Nigel announced to his team that they would be doing another open house tour, and this time he'll be using the 5 human senses to capture imagination. This was bad news for Dean and Figment. If the last open house tour got such an outrage, then this one would have the same effect, if not worse. However, Dean had a little spark of inspiration. He devised a plan to sabotage the tour and teach guests what imagination was truly about. Dean and Figment worked in secret to make changes to the tour while being careful not to get caught by the doctor. The plan was simple. Figment would follow the tour and ruin the experiments before Nigel gets the chance of controlling the imagination, and then would tell the guests to let their imaginations run wild. On June 2nd, 2002, the open house tour began. Nigel welcomes everyone to the Institute and...
Oh, can I go too?
Figment interferes a few seconds in. He turns the tone machine into a phone and plays train noises. He scrambles the letters in the eye chart and sprays the guests with the skunk scent. That one was probably unnecessary. This gives Figment the opportunity to show the guests how powerful imagination is. By turning his home upside down, Dr. Channing finally realizes that imagination shouldn't be controlled, but let go and run wild. The plan worked perfectly, and Figment turned the entire Institute into a world of fantasy, where imagination can live on. Dean's plan worked. He finally unleashed imagination's true identity. He may not be there to see it, but his little spark created a wonderful world where everyone can be inspired to use their imaginations. Dean truly is a dream finder. Very poetic, isn't it?